Jeeva Cordia, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, if you're listening to a recording of this Fireside Chat. This was 115. So welcome you all, and as I usually do, I will start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiakon na fud na crinne. Gomara Shiakon in our jaili agus in our jirha. Gonairi lin ar kij garmaka gaumich buikas jiv jea chwivdaka is spirit chwivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities, for peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their hearts the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. Well, it's lovely to see you all. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat, where I am in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. As you can hear, my throat, I'm a bit hoarse, so let's hope you can hear me, because I'm not able to shout louder. I have up to the volume of my mic, so I hope that helps. So let me see where you're all from today. Hi, Alan from Killaloo, Ballina, Ireland, Somerset Hills, glorious London. It's been sunny today. It's a bit cloudy now, but it was just wonderful to be out in sunshine today. West Virginia, Montreal, Northamptonshire, wonderful. Let me see, there's loads of other people. Fox River, Illinois. Great. Hertfordshire, Wyoming, Dartford, UK, Whidbey Island, Washington, West Cornwall. Just wonderful to see you all. Let me see if there's more from here. The Welsh Borders, wonderful. Montreal, Richmond, Virginia, Appalachian, Ohio, Sweden. Hello, Sweden. Scotland, Louisiana. Wanganui, New Zealand. That's lovely to have you so far away. Nottingham, London, British Columbia, Canada, Huddersfield. Absolutely wonderful to see you all. Andrew King from London, Northern California. Wonderful. So we are going to France. God, my voice is breaking, so just please forgive me. We're going to France, and I'd like to introduce you to Mark Fitzpatrick. So, Mark, welcome to another Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much, Eimear. Lovely to be here. It's a real honor and a pleasure.
So, as you can hear from Mark's accent, he is not French, he is Irish. So, what brings you to France?
Well, I used to tell people I just had to get out of the house. And then that's 20 years ago now. I moved over to France to live in Paris, and the idea was that I would go and live in garrets and write novels, and that's exactly what I did. And that was in 2003. But there was a bit of a family history. When I was 8 years old, I had spent a year in the south of France. My dad was an academic; he was a mathematician, and he went on sabbatical to Toulouse, and we lived in a little village in just sort of not far from the Pyrenees for a year. And that was a very formative experience.
You're saying they can't see you. I can see you. Do you have a light in front of you that you could put on?
Hang on.
A lot of people say he actually is, because I can see him.
Yeah, it looks very clear to me. Try this. I can add a little bit of light in front of me like that. Does that help?
Is that any better from people? They say it's pretty dark. I don't know if there's a camera, because I can see you. So A lot of people can't see you. That is really, really strange because I can
How
see you.
odd. How odd. Um, yeah, the lights up here are not very bright. Well, so I've added a candle. I hope that helps. Looks very
Uh,
clear to me.
yeah, it's very, very strange. So, no, they
This
can't see
might
you.
this might be part of the I think I've got gremlins.
Even on Facebook, they can't see. Still can't see you either on Facebook. That is really, really weird because I can see you.
Okay, let me try and change the camera.
Okay.
Now, let's just turn it on again. Up. Now, any different? Um, the picture looks really clear to me. I don't really know what else I can.
Yeah, they're saying the right side is dark. Wait a second, I better quit. It's hardly my settings. No. No, it's my inbuilt camera, standard definition. I don't understand this.
No, let
This
me
is
just try
really,
something.
really weird because this
Uh,
never happened before. Are you
all right.
sharing your video? No. So bad people are asking questions.
No.
Um, you're on your phone, but we've used phone, and you popped on. He said he just popped on briefly for a second. Um,
Ah. Um. I have no idea what that could be. Okay. Well, shall I shall I leave and re-enter the room? See if that
do
works.
maybe do that. Just leave and re-enter.
All
Forgive
right.
us for this. Um, I'll just read one of Howard's poems, if that's okay, just to keep us going. Sorry about this. I have no idea because I can see him perfectly. Okay. I've just opened a page at Howard's book, Darkness Shades So Light Can Be. So when does sorrow turn? Oh, here's back. Hold on a second. Now let's see. Is that any better? Anyway, while I'm waiting for a response, I'll just read this poem anyway. So when does sorrow turn to pity for self? Seeping soul's wealth to a pit to quit life's change from sun split. When does sorrow turn, becoming full fed, with skin to shed? O life, null now for winter night's dark lull, for newborn life, unsteady. Slow crawl to make flight ready. When does sorrow turn, ready for spring's warmth? When does sorrow turn to fly high? Wings now dry, cut at pity's tie. Soul soars flight of butterfly. Yes, you can see you now. Great.
No. Oh my, I have been absolutely cursed with technology over the last 24 hours. I think that, someone said gremlins, and I said, no, no, it's the fairies. It's definitely the fairies. They love to mess with my technology. Um, so, where were we? Yeah, I was just talking about France. Shall I
You
go
went
on?
you went to yeah, you went to Paris.
Yes. And that was, you know, going to Paris. I had studied, so I'd been here for a little bit as a kid. We'd come on holidays all the time. My mum's family were particularly Francophile. My grandmother used to like telling me every time I had her on the phone, she said, "You know the reason that you're in France is because of me, don't you?" And I would say, "Yes, Grandma, I do." And she said because she was Irish Catholic in Liverpool, and she went to the La Sagesse Sisters convent school and loved French, and it was kind of, they used to go on holiday to France in the 60s camping from England, which was quite unusual. Like it wasn't everyone that was going camping on a French campsite with French people. And so my mom did speak very good French, and she and my dad used to go to France when they were young. And anyway, so it was in the family, and I just, went to Paris on a sort of a study trip for a couple of months, fell in love with it, absolutely enraptured with Paris, as you are when you're 21. And I had to get back. And so I went over and got a job in a bookshop, um, and met the woman who I ended up marrying. She also worked in the bookshop. And then that was it. I just stayed, and I ended up going back into academia and studying further and doing a PhD in literature and teaching in university, teaching in secondary school for a while. Um, and then like for a lot of people, my life changed radically a couple of years ago when COVID and lockdowns came along,
Uh-huh.
and we ended up coming down to the southwest of France, sort of not far from Bordeaux, where my wife's family were, to sort of escape, our tiny apartment in Paris. We didn't really know how long it was going to last. We didn't know it was going to go on,
Good.
and they were actually shutting down travel. So we just kind of sneaked out before they shut down. And we ended up spending the lockdown and then the summer there, so 6 months. And after that, we just said, look, we cannot possibly go back to Paris with two young kids and live in a little apartment and live in a concrete jungle and have the metro and all of that stuff. And so we did everything we could to get back down here. And so for the rest, so one more school year, and we came back. And now we're living in a little village right on the banks of the Dordogne, and we couldn't be happier with that.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's wonderful. Wow. So, um, how did you find Rotary, or what's your kind of you said you are come from a Catholic background. So, how was the journey from Catholicism to being a Druid in France? How
It
did
was,
that?
I think it's been a lifelong one because I think that it's one of those things that makes a lot more sense in retrospect. When I look back at my life and my childhood, especially, and think, oh yeah, the seeds of this were definitely already working. So as a little kid, I was just absolutely fascinated with magic and monsters and mysteries. We used to have famous Halloween parties because my birthday was on one side of Halloween and my brother's was on the other. And
Wow.
we'd have a big Halloween party, and you know, the American cousins would send us a load of kind of American Halloween stuff, like the fake cobwebs and the candy corn and all that. And the German friends would bring fireworks, and people still talk about these Halloween parties. Like my parents put in a huge effort, and they also very much cultivated, I think, my taste for the weird and the mysterious. Like they never discouraged me, but they used to, I used to love horror stories, and I was obsessed with ghosts, and I was obsessed with magic. And I think that for a lot of people, and it was certainly the case for me, there comes a time when you're a teenager when you kind of want to grow out of all of that,
Yeah.
and you want to sort of put away childish things, so to speak. Um, and that was also the time when I really rejected Catholicism, and
Yeah.
when I sort of got very quite and in a quite angry way, and sort of um, rebelled against it and refused to go to mass anymore, and um, became, I think looking back, I was aiming to be like kind of an existentialist atheist,
Okay.
um, like which so it kind of makes sense, right? That I would then go to Paris and sort of like smoke cigarettes in cafes and be cool. That was sort of the idea, and I wanted to be a writer of very serious literary fiction and all of that stuff. Um, but funnily enough, in my early 20s, little by little, my love of the magical and the wondrous returned, and
Yeah.
um, it was just unavoidable. And I realized that it was actually a bit immature of me, rather, to reject it so hard. Um, it was it was a part of me, and I think that in a sense, my whole journey since then has been almost like a return, trying to get back to what I could sense and see and know as a child.
Mhm.
The sense of wonder, the sense of the magical, and my love for fantasy literature and mythic literature, my love for poetry, because I
Mhm.
started writing poetry again, and I think it was in my probably my late 20s, that I well, there's a whole sort of in and out winding story, but I gradually started to discover that magic and paganism are real, that they're things that real people do, and you can actually do this, and you can read about it, and you can um, and so I started exploring it, and I was very voracious in my exploration. Um, Everything from sort of chaos magic to ceremonial magic and grimoires and tarot and all of these things. And I was just absolutely fascinated with all of it. But gradually, there started to appear this strain in it, which was not to do with exploring magic and power, I suppose, but rather it started to become somewhat more devotional, and
Okay.
it became more about ceremony and ritual as a way of being in the world and a way of recognizing the world and saying thank you, rather than just, okay, I'm going to do this thing.
Summoning. Yeah.
Yeah, not goal oriented, not to achieve an end, but rather to achieve a state of being. And since I was a kid, I had been very very surrounded by, I think a lot of us were, Irish mythology, and I had read collections of stories, and I knew all the famous stories, and I had a wonderful old edition of Jim Fitzpatrick's Book of Conquests. I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
if you know Fitzpatrick, the
Yes, they are.
artist.
Yeah, the
And
artist.
they're very, you look at them now and they're very kind of 70s in a way, like they're a bit cheesy, but I just was fascinated. And, it was actually a nice, simple retelling of the Laragawala Erin, just with like kind of almost comic book muscle bound heroes,
That's right.
Um, it was good. And, but so I had an awareness of um, the Irish mythology and the Irish sort of god folk,
Yeah.
started to speak to them and include them in my cosmology and include them in my devotions, and started actually developing that relationship. And so clearly, it was a short step from there to start thinking about druidry, druids being obviously the figure that would be that would be most implicated in that kind of mythos. But the thing that really hooked me, um, it was 2018. So I'd been, discovering all of this, reading voraciously, absolutely researching loads of stuff, and also doing stuff like
Mhm.
experiencing magical experimentation and um, writing sort of almost devotional poetry, um, but without actually stepping on the path of studying druidry or calling myself one.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but the thing that changed, I think, 2018, I had just become a school teacher for the first time. Before I was always a university professor, and
Big shift, big change.
big change. And I was teaching in secondary school, and and my second child, my daughter, had just been born, and I felt like I was shifting into a different phase of life, where I was no longer the sort of the young hero setting off on a quest, but stepping more into a mentor role and into a role of, I was like, you're not Luke Skywalker anymore. You're more like Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know? And and that sort of mentor relationship with the kids, I found really fulfilling and really amazing. And then my own children. And that summer, completely independently, two people, my own sister and my best friend in Paris, um, both asked me to conduct their wedding ceremonies. Now, I had never done this, and I had never mentioned to either of them that it was something that I could even imagine doing. But both of
Yeah.
them just decided I was the one who should do that. I think because they both wanted non-religious and yet weddings with soul, right? And I
Yeah.
know that you're a celebrant
Absolutely.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, for me, it was a great honor, and I felt, God, what claim do I have on this role? And it made me think again, this kind of, so mentoring, ministering, guiding, and it all started leading me to that archetype of the druid.
Yeah.
And I said to both of them, to my friend Estelle and to my sister Anya, I said, oh, you know what I'll do? I should come dressed as a druid. And both of them said, oh no, don't do that. They didn't quite want to go all that way, right? But I met them and we talked about it, and I went through the whole designing a ceremony with them, and it was full of um, meaningful spiritual things. Like one of the couples had that symbol of lighting two flames and then lighting a third larger flame from the two flames to symbolize their coming together. The other couple opted for a kind of a hand fasting thing where they held hands, and one of their friends made a beautiful garland with ivy and flowers, and I wrapped it round their hands as I said the words that bound them. And for both couples, funnily enough, I noticed that you used words from John O'Donoghue in
Yes.
opening, as you always do. And I used the Bannacht from Anam Cara, the blessing,
That's beautiful.
the very
Absolutely
beginning,
beautiful.
which, like, the a lot of people know it, and a lot of people sort of maybe in our circles might be very familiar, but people who haven't heard it, the people at the weddings, they were absolutely gobsmacked by how great it is as a blessing. And I think it works as a wedding blessing. Lovely. And so I did those things, and I thought, wow, I guess more than ever before, I had a sense that my experience with ritual and with the numinous and with the mysterious was not just a choice, it was becoming a vocation. That I was called to something, some type of ministry, perhaps. Um, and and then this is the clincher, and I told this story again recently, but it's just hilarious. That autumn, actually coming towards Christmas, I had taken one of my school classes to my favorite secondhand English bookshop in Paris to teach them the fine art of browsing. And there were little classes. There was
Lucky students.
Yeah, well, we had a good time. I loved teaching that age group, like 16, 17, 18. And we went, and the bookseller, who was a good friend of mine, Phyllis Cohen from Chicago, she gave them a little talk about what it's like to be a secondhand bookseller and a book hound, and it was just amazing. And then I said to them all, right, everyone, the book you need is somewhere here. You just don't know it yet. And now it is your job to browse and find the book for you. And I was looking for Christmas presents. I was buying, I often give my family just a secondhand book, like it's not expensive, but there's thought in it. And this guy who happened to be there, and he was just browsing as well, and he and I started sharing recommendations and just kind of saying, "Oh, have you read this one?" Like, "Oh, that one's good." And and we chatted a bit. He was a freelance editor, friends with the bookseller as well. So anyway, I ended up with a stack of books, about a dozen books, and I was going to the till with this stack like this, and this man, the editor, he walked up to me at the till and he said, "I think you might need this one too." And he handed me another book, and it was John Michael Greer's Druidry Handbook. And I just looked at it and I said, "Oh, okay, I guess I do." And I bought it and read it cover to cover, then started doing some research about what orders there were and found Obod. And within 2 weeks, I had signed up for the course. And there's a hilarious coda to that, which is that I met that man again, like a couple of years later in different circumstances, through a different common friend. And I said to him, "Do you remember meeting me in Berkeley Books a couple of years ago, and we were sharing recommendations, and you gave me that book on Druidry?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Why did you give me the book on Druidry?" And he said, "I have no idea." He didn't know. He had nothing to do with Druidry, had never even cracked a book on it.
It's just magic. Liz Hill says a great approach to book shopping, but that's how I discovered Obod, is a book hopped out. I mean, it's so true. So many times books have hopped out from a bookshelf that allowed me to, this is the book I need to use for teaching or whatever. And I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm not too sure about this. Buy it anyway. And the Modern Day Druidess by Cassandra Easton popped out at me. And I was with my very good friend, Shaban Kulula. He's a traditional healer from Tanzania. He was visiting us for the summer. And I said, "Look at this. Oh my God, this has just popped out." And I said, "I'll buy this."
Yeah.
Modern Day Druidess. And she mentions, and I love the book because it's very pragmatic. And She mentioned Obot at the back of the book and said she trained, she was a solitary druid. And I said, that's great, because I don't want to be, I hate groups, you know that. And it suited me. And I went online. And I've never looked back. And it's again, I was in that shop in Dublin, in that bookshop with Shaban at that time. And he's looking at books and I'm looking at books. And then it's just pure magic. It's those wonderful synchronous opportunities, or those keys that you're given. Nimi says, secondhand bookshops are a bit like dowsing. Perhaps, yes.
Yes, yes. It's a form of bibliomancy, you know, because some people say that bibliomancy, well, it is like you open a book to a random page and the words will mean something or whatever.
That's right.
But it can also
Absolutely.
be, you can do it with, it's like bibliotechomancy, with a whole library. You walk into the library, like, and anyone who's been a research student, like I was, sometimes what you really need to do is walk down the stacks, just randomly, and just run your hand along the shelf.
Yeah.
And sometimes the book will fall into your hand, you know? It just does.
It does.
It's
Howard, my husband, late husband, he was a poet. And so he didn't, you know, it's very hard to get him a present because he didn't want anything or need anything. But he would say, just aim to the children, just go to the poetry section of the bookshop and do that. Just run your hand, just scan it along it, and then just touch the book. And we would do that. So then there was no anxiety. Would he like this? Is this the right book? And it was the right book for him. And it was just based on whatever the bibliotechomancy, you know, just brilliant. So a few others, you know, just somebody else says, Steph, I found Druidry through that book as well. I don't know whether it's John Michael Greer's book or Cassandra Eason's book, but it's just, Anne Beer says how true this is about the right book jumping out at you. It's happened to me many times, especially in the secondhand bookshops on Glastonbury High Street. Well, Glastonbury High Street is a dangerous place to go for secondhand books. I say, I'm not buying any books. I'm not buying any books. And I do.
I actually just found out recently that there's one of the shops in the local town. It turns out that it's not just an antique shop, it's actually also an esoteric bookshop. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize. And I said to my wife, okay, I'm going to go and look at the esoteric bookshop. And she said, don't buy any books. Just like literally none. Just, you can't, because she knows that if I bought one, it might all, you know. But
that's right.
It is a wonderful thing. And, you know, if you talk to someone, so my friend Phyllis, since retired, people who are book dealers, like secondhand book dealers, they will tell you stories that would raise the hair on your head.
Really?
Oh God, yeah. I think they are, in a way, they are a kind of order of magicians, I would say. The bookhounds, like, they all know each other, they have a network, they have a sort of ways of talking about their wares. But can you imagine, like, one of your main sources of the books they get would be estate sales. So what you're doing is you're going to a dead person's house, and if you have a contact, you've got first choice from the dead person's, or they offer you a price for everything and you have to take it without looking. That kind of thing, you know? So it is a fascinating world. Like, I know a few people who are secondhand book dealers, and it is a very mystical profession. It's a bit like the Horseman's Word or something, you know, those fraternal organizations of, I mean, where the Masons originally came from. But you can just imagine that being an incredibly rich world for novels or something. I wonder if anyone's done that. But, you know, about the secret fraternity, you know, the secret order of the bookhounds.
Wonderful. Pat Booker says, my favorite secondhand books are the ones heavily annotated by previous owners. So you just don't get a book. You get a book haunted by a person's mind. Now, that's really interesting, because for some people get really irritated by the marks. And for years, I wouldn't write on a book because it's like, no, this is a sacred thing. And then I would forget stuff. And I go, to hell with this. It's my book. And if my mind haunts the next owner, so be it.
Mm.
I'm now allowed myself to marks. I mean, I do have sticky things, but I have
Mm.
had to allow myself, because it's really interesting when people write comments. And even in, so I've been doing for the last 2 years a course in Irish paleography with a wonderful man, Damien McManus, who's a now retired professor in Trinity. We do it online. So he shows us the ancient manuscripts. Now I'm at the back of the class. I'm the dunce because I'm no Irish scholar, and there are some really good people in the class. But when you look at the manuscript, the scribes themselves wrote in the comments.
Yeah, I love those. I
Sometimes
love
like,
that.
I have a hangover, or will you? So um, the person who wrote the text was not the same person who wrote the capital letter at the beginning of the page.
Ah,
And they
yeah.
would leave the space. And sometimes they'd be waiting, and there might be a comment, will you hurry up? I need you to put this thing here. So they, even in those ancient, you see, the sacred manuscripts that are now in
Mm.
university libraries and museums, and in glass cases and protected against the weather and all sorts of stuff. Those people wrote in the margins as well. And I just think that's really, really interesting.
It is. That's lovely. And I think that, you know, haunted by the ghost of that person is beautiful. I love that. I love seeing sentimental dedications in the front of a book. That I found one once in again another Paris secondhand bookshop. And it was a few days before my birthday, and I found an edition of a Robert Louis Stevenson book, who was an author I was studying for my PhD,
Yeah.
and the dedication had been written on my birthday, but in 1913.
Wow.
And I thought, better have that. But it was a lovely, very loving dedication. I think it was from a grandparent to a child. Um, and I think one of my favorite ones ever, though, was it was I was in the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, which is a very, very high level kind of, it's like a university, but even more so, even much more selective. What they call a grande école, like one of the great schools.
Okay.
It's a bit like there's a very Hogwarts feel in it, like all the people in it are like very strange nerds. And I used to go to the library sometimes there because I was signed up partially as a student. And I was in the stacks and I was feeling a bit down, and I was sitting in between the shelves. They were very, very narrow shelves, and
Mhm.
to fit in more of them. And it was a mezzanine, like it was a half floor in between the floor and the ceiling. So it was a very cramped space. And I pulled down Richard Ellman's biography of Joyce, which was not what I was supposed to be reading at all, but I just felt like reading some of Joyce's life just because. And any young Irish person who is exiled in Paris must feel a certain fellow
Yes.
feeling with Joyce, of course. So I was reading this, and I opened it to the next page, and there was a train ticket from 5 years earlier or so, from Paris to Geneva, the sleeper train,
Okay.
in the name of um, the actually I probably won't say the name out loud because it's a person that the name was the most impossibly romantic sounding name in the world, and it was their night train from Paris to Geneva, and I just thought, wow, that is just a whole novel right there, you know, the night train from Paris to Geneva. Um, what were you studying here? What were you doing here? Because it was clearly an Anglophone name. That's the thing. It wasn't a French name. And they'd been reading about Joyce in English. Um, so I ended up looking up the person, who it turns out was now a professor in London,
Go away.
who was a few years older than me. And I wrote to her and I said, you know what? I found this train ticket. And it just made my day because I thought, what a wonderful romantic sketch of a story that was. And she was very gracious and said, that's really lovely. It's made my day too. What a weird thing. But those kind of connections, like the things you find inside books or the things you find, um, I don't know if you can, people can probably see behind me over here. There's like actually a bookshelves and a library. And I am now sitting in the attic room of our new house, which
There's been lovely comments, people envying you, your little cubbyhole. Yes.
it's it is absolutely lovely. And the people we bought it from, they passed it on to us in a lovely way, because I think they would have loved to keep the house, but they couldn't manage, between the three of them, the three siblings, to figure out what they would do with it. But they left us a lot of things. And one of the things they left us is most of the books behind me belonged to their father, the old colonel. This was his study. And he also had, to that side of me, there's an old brass framed bed which he had installed here so he could take cheeky naps. So
Wow.
so
Are
they
you
left
doing
me
the
that
same?
too. Yeah, exactly. But you know, the look, I went through all of the books because they just couldn't get rid of them, you know. They didn't have any value other than sentimental, and there's only so much you can take. And they
That's right.
just said, well, you know, thank you for taking care of them. And I said I would. And you look through his books and see his old. He had made little labels on the shelves for each section. You know, for military history, gardening, um, ancient religions. You know, that kind of stuff. Sounds like an
Beautiful.
amazing.
So this professor in London, did
Yeah,
she respond to you?
she did. She did. She when she wrote back, she said, she said, that is such a lovely memory. Thank you so much. It was from a strange time in my life, but that trip to Geneva was very special. Thanks for reminding me of it. You know, just she it was lovely. Yeah,
Brilliant. Wow. Wow. Devourer of Man, he's given me, I'm actually doing that at the moment. And he's given me a recipe for my
Mm,
throat. I'm actually doing that. Thank you. So thanks for the suggestion. Um, oh, that is just beautiful. Absolutely wonderful. Now, so you are a writer, you publish
mm.
novels, you're a poet. So would you like to just share one of your poems?
I'd love to. I'd love to. Um, and I had a little think beforehand, and chose a couple that I think I would like to share, and I think that might speak to people. This is one. This is a recent one. I wrote this for Valentine's Day, and it was because, you know, knowing some of the people I know, there was a kind of a there was a conversation about the idea of love spells, of love magic, and it occurred to me that that's going about things completely the wrong way. And this was my response to it. Um, but it is called love spell. So this is a love spell. I cast it on myself. Imagine the infinite worlds on which you are not present. Imagine all it took to get you here. Love is not something that you just fall into. Love is something that you do. Love is something that you choose, a verb, a doing word. Why seek a person to carry all that love? Why cast a spell to catch the eye of one lone traveler going by? You must learn the trick of love and cast the spell on you. Look upon the world held within a tight furled flower. Imagine the sun-loving power that drives a tiny seeking bud up through the snow. Ground-breaking, snow-piercing, sun-seeking, upward hurling, all uncurling, brightness bursting. Be the flower, explode in delicate loveliness. Imagine all the yearning, melancholy love you have expended on some passing soul, then take that whole and gather all and swallow it. Then feel it blast out from your sacred bleeding heart. For each of us so loved this world, we gave it to our only gotten self. You have no other. Make good this promise this leap in the dark into the roulette of incarnation. Love with fierce and desperate, hopeless love, all passing things. Love the world eternal, love every song it sings. How can one mere mortal carry all the love you hold within? Only the world deserves all the love you have to give. You did not choose to come here, but by all that's holy, every day you choose to stay. You say the world does not return your love? That you've been hurt before? The world can only sigh and sadly shake its head and shake the leaves in every rustling breeze and say, have you not heard me day by day profess my everlasting love for you? Have you not seen each sunrise I create for you? Each soft drift of snow I lay for you, each flight of geese, each fire of autumn, each roar of wave, each infinitely delicate tracery of moss or seed or spider's webs in which I write my love letters to you. Darling, turn and realize that this shadow that walks after you is a trick of light. The world taking your measure, the world's gift of every pain and every pleasure, treasure, hedgerow, bright stone, fast stream, leaping goat, purring cat, singing kettle, furious storm, cool draught of peace. The world has written an infinite book in which it tells undying love for you. You must write back. A prayer, a poem, a thank you note, a song, a whispered charm, some gesture. You so loved the world, you chose to give yourself. Spread your arms, embrace, surrender to the love of your life.
Wow. Wow, that was so powerful. Load great poem. I love this. You might make a poster with art. Lisa is suggesting. Super glad I got here in time for the poetry. Amazing, lovely. I love that and concur. So very wise. Thank you. Beautifully written and read. Wow. Yeah, you knew not all poets read their poetry well. You do. So just lovely. Absolutely beautiful. Claps and cheers. I'm speechless. Yeah. So, so powerful, and it really spoke to my heart. So these are the comments that are people. Thank you so very much. I felt that and got tears. Pat says that was special. Speechless. Love that. I shall try and love myself more. And again, you know, that appointment with yourself to do and love not being something you fall into, but a doing, you know, that has to be, this is philosophical Phoenix, that has to be the best love poem I've ever known of. Yet I couldn't have appreciated in years past. Like, absolutely, you know, these things come when you're ready to hear them. Thank you so much. So touching. Wonderful. Words are magical spells. Stunning. So just beautiful. It's a great reaction. Absolutely.
Thank
Really,
you,
really.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Now, is that published anywhere?
No. I haven't ever published any poetry. I think I will, probably, but there's one poem of mine, which appears in a book that just came out, but it's not a poetry book. It's actually a book by my friend Melinda Ridinger called The White Deer, and it's an amazing book about the figure of the white deer in mythology and culture and anthropology and yeah. So, and she uses one of my poems as a kind of an afterword to that work. But I think I'm gonna put together a collection probably, and one of my current projects is I'm publishing one of my own books, self-publishing a book, and I've kind of almost by accident set up a little mini publishing company. So I think I'm going to start doing that if I can figure out the logistics, I'm going to start publishing stuff of my own, but other people too.
Brilliant.
But there's a funny story about that poem, which is that so I've never I've been writing for years and years, and I've never published a book. And finally, I decided to hell with it after sending books to publishers and agents and competitions and everything, and never got anywhere. I had lovely reactions. Like agents and publishers would write back to me and say, "This is really good, but I just don't think it's something we can sell. Not commercial enough." And so I said, "All right, well, I'm going to do it myself." Finally, took the bull by the horns. Mostly, part of the way through the process, I've got a book that's nearly ready to go, like a short novel. It's nearly finished, and it's going to be. I'm just in touch with the printers for it now. But that poem, Love Spell, I posted me reading it on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page and for my work, and I posted it. And a few hours later, on Valentine's Day, and a few hours later, I got a phone call from somebody who I hadn't spoken to in 20 years, but we kind of kept up a little bit, the odd message here and there. And he phoned me just to say, he said, "Oh my God, that poem, it was just what I needed to hear today." He'd had his heart broken from a love gone wrong and all this stuff. And we had a chat about it, and I was like, "Well, I'm so glad that it touched you and all this." And then he said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, I don't suppose you have any unpublished novels sitting around?" And I said, "Well, actually, I do. I've got a couple, but why do you ask?" And he goes, "Oh, it's just that I've just become the literary editor of a small publishing house. Can you send me one?" And so 2 weeks later, I had a publishing deal. So now I've got a mainstream publishing deal as well, which is just, I mean, I don't want to say ironic, because that's not, it's not the irony. It's funny. It's funny that those things would happen at the same time, and that they would happen that way. And I think that, it's part of the same thing we were talking about earlier with those synchronicities with books and things like that.
They're
I think
doorways, they're keys,
they are keys. They are
to
keys. And I think that one of the keys is, yes, attention, to constantly be aware and to be looking for it. And some people say, "Oh, synchronicities aren't really synchronicities. They're just coincidences, but because you're always looking for them, you find them." And I say, yes, exactly.
duh.
You have to be looking for them.
Yeah.
And yes, if it's confirmation bias or if it's pattern recognition, it doesn't matter. They're meaningful because they're meaningful to us. But I think that one of the other things that's good for at least my type of living magically is, I may be making a mess of things, but at least I'm doing it entertainingly. And if the gods are looking down, they're always like, "Okay, come on, give that guy another spin of the wheel. He's hilarious. Watch and see if he messes this one up." I think that entertaining the gods is a good policy. Much better than defying them. And I think sometimes, they get bored of, adoration and worship. And they kind of just want you to entertain them, make them
Be
laugh.
and make them laugh. Exactly. It's really interesting, that notion of, you find coincidence because you're looking for them. But it's not until you pay attention to anything will you find things and notice things. It's always about paying attention and being aware. So you notice the ladybird, or you notice a bird flying by, or whatever it is you notice.
Yeah.
It's always about attention. Attention to inspiration. And
yes, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that deciding or being called to a kind of a magical way of living and a magical outlook. Like the phrase magical thinking is used a bit pejoratively by psychology, because it means that you are attributing unseen, irrational causes to events. However, magical thinking can also be a complement to rational thinking,
yes.
and it certainly makes life more enjoyable. Um, like as long as you don't let it entirely rule your life, I think um, that paying magical attention to the world around you, for one thing, just because it's beautiful, um, but for another, just because when you learn to read the world symbolically, whether it be symbols that are um, conventional or symbols that are esoteric or symbols that are purely personal, um, it gives the world this um, vibrancy of meaning and significance and um, intensity, I suppose. Um,
Absolutely. And I think magical thinking is really, really important. And even in psychology, because I'm one myself,
mm,
in some ways, we'll say in solution focused therapy, brief therapy, we have the miracle question. So you say somebody is depressed.
mm,
So supposing tonight when you go home, a miracle happened and you were no
mm.
longer depressed, but nobody told you that the miracle had happened. How would you know it had happened? What would be different when you woke up?
Huh.
So usually someone who's depressed, I imagine, it's like the alarm goes off and all you want to do is no, just go back under the covers and cancel the day. So what would be different? So if you're not depressed, you might go switch off the alarm, hop out of bed, maybe go and wash yourself,
Mm,
and and then maybe you'd smile at your partner. Maybe you go and have a breakfast, and you just talk about all the details. Not, well, I'd go to work now. What would you do? What's the next thing you do after you get up?
yeah.
All of those things. So getting them to describe it, they are creating a picture, a mental
Yes.
image of what they would do if the depression wasn't there. And it's really, really important. And also, if you had a magical wand, what would you do?
Mm,
And that actually gets you to step outside the box because you are constrained by um, maybe duty or obligation or
mm,
cultural norms, or I've only ever seen the world this way. And it
mm.
allows you, magical thinking helps you to step outside that. And it gets you to see another possibility, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that I love the use of, imagination and creativity and visualization also, and all of those things are an absolutely intrinsic part of magic, but also just, I think, is what you're saying, an intrinsic part of a healthy, lively inner life and a healthy, lively imagination and a healthy, lively engagement with the world.
How can you write a book if you don't have magical thinking? You mentioned, you love fantasy. If you
Yeah.
can't, how do you write a fantasy novel? Or if you have no sense of the magic yourself, how can you read one and enjoy one? Um, um, Someone says, I never thought of magical thinking that way. Thank you, Eimear. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I wanted to ask you, who are your favorite fantasy authors?
Oh, impossible question, except that I have one far and away favorite, I think, which is Ursula Le Guin.
Oh, she's brilliant. The
Oh,
Earthsea Quartet.
yeah. I was given that when it was just a trilogy by my grandmother when I was 8.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I read it when I was 8, and I have been reading it and rereading it. I have the same copy still, the covers come off it. I have the same copy, and I've been rereading it ever since. And it is one of the only books in my entire life that has never stopped giving up more riches to me. Um, like I actually, as a kid, I was enchanted by it, and as an adult, I'm enchanted again still. But I'm so impressed by um, how poetic it is, how profound it is, and how economical. Like it's 3 books, and they're not even very long. And I remember each book of it as conjuring up an entire world that was real in all possible ways. It was an immersive experience. But when I look back at it now, the passages that I remembered being so vivid, they're not huge, big, long descriptions. They are evocations. They evoke things in very few words. It's just that she knows the right words because she was a poet and she was a philosopher. I think she's one of the greatest writers of the last 100 years, to be honest. You know, in her fantasy and science fiction, which are highly philosophical, but also in her essays and in her poetry. Just, I don't know, she's one of my heroes.
And that trilogy is a quartet. She did another book.
There's actually a fifth one as well.
Oh, is there? Okay,
There
because
is,
it's
yeah.
yeah.
And
I just
there's,
love it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
fantastic. And but apart from her, I have a lot that I like. Just trying to think what else would kind of jump out at me. I think of the classics, obviously Tolkien. I was quite a fan of the sort of Michael Moorcock Elric stuff on the Eternal Champions when I was a teenager, but I think it's aged badly for me.
Really? Okay.
I still love the concepts, but the writing doesn't really.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah.
but and then in terms of contemporary writers, actually, interestingly enough, there was I kind of jumped back into fantasy when I was working in the bookshop after rejecting it as a teenager as being, too childish. But like I realize now that my rejection only lasted a few years. Like by the age of 23, I was back into it. But I remember in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of these kind of big, hefty tomes, and they were all just basically rip-offs of Tolkien. And I used to read all of them. But I was a bit bored, and that's what I was bored with. And I remember 5 or 6 years ago, um, coming across an article that was about if you've read Game of Thrones and you're looking for a new read, why not try these books by women? And I said, oh, okay, let's try them. And they were really good, but they were stuff that was from like the 80s and 90s, and that I was kind of going, well, I wonder why I didn't hear of these. There was Robin McKinley, I think that was the Blue Dragon. There was the Thief of something, I can't remember the other one, but the ones that really, really took my imagination. So this is my favorite contemporary fantasy author is Ellen Kushner. I don't know if you've heard of her. But she first published the novel Swords Point in, I think it was 89. And there was a follow-up, um, and there's two follow-ups to that. But unlike many of these other trilogies, the first follow-up was about the niece of the protagonist from the first one, and the next follow-up was set many years later. So they were kind of linked stories, and she's continued writing stories in that universe. But and she also did I think she won the Nebula Award with a version of Thomas the Rhymer, which is really amazing. But this book, Swords Point, and the sequels, Privilege of the Sword, and the third one, I can't come to mind now. I read those and I said, bloody hell, imagine if I had read these instead of the kind of, blokey sub-Tolkien doorstoppers from the 90s, because these are books about scoundrels fighting duels, and they are they're set in a fictional fantasy city, but there's no particular supernatural magic, and it's a lot about politics and going to the grand ball and low life on the streets and all of that. And they tell stories that include passionate love stories, but that are queer, like passionate love stories between two men or two women, or between different combinations of those. And they are poetic and fun and stylish and swashbuckling and absolutely amazing. So Ellen Kushner, everybody, read her work. And I just thought, wow, what a contrast to the stuff that was popular back in those days. But I think fantasy has branched out a lot now since then. It's become a lot more diversity to the stories being told, and a lot more the kind that I tend to like tends to be that which is got a high element of the mythic, of
Yeah.
the fairy tale, of the stuff that's resonant and enchanting, rather than necessarily the kind of the grim and gritty, you know.
Do you like Terry Pratchett?
Love Terry Pratchett. Love Terry Pratchett.
Well, I'm afraid I read people put me onto her. The reason I started reading him, I'd heard about him for a while.
Mm.
And then there was an argument, not an argument, a discussion between two fellow druids about whether I was Nanny Og or Granny Weatherwax. Couldn't work. So I couldn't comment. And
Mm.
so then I got the Witches series, and I just loved it because he is so witty. He is so wise. And then I was going away recently with my two children on a holiday, and I thought, oh God, what I want to read, because I had my Kindle, and I thought, and then I saw one of the Wizard ones, and I bought it, and then I ordered a few more on Kindle because I hadn't done the Wizard ones, and I thought, and then I'm saying, so each time I'm reading a line, look at this, and it's like, isn't this amazing what he wrote? But I'm afraid to get into novels because I bury myself in them and I do nothing else.
Yeah, I know.
So when I read Tolkien the year I was 30, I was like, I went into Middle Earth for 3 weeks and I did nothing else. And everything was through a third or a Middle Earth lens. And I know he claimed that it wasn't an allegory. And I thought, well, for me, it was allegorical for my life at the time. And I said, this is really powerful. Now, when I'm 40, I will do the same. And I did. I read it when I was 40. And it had a different sense of meaning for me. Again, I went into Middle Earth for the 3 weeks. And I said, I'll read it when I'm 50. I never did. And I haven't gone here since. But it was really, really interesting.
I used to get, lost in novels like that. But the last few years, my attention span has been terrible. It's just through various things like lockdowns and COVID and problems in work and small children and also online life. There's too much online distraction. And I find it really hard to really get lost in a novel now. But Terry Pratchett used to be, for me, the absolute go-to sort of comfort read, and I've read them all so many times. Like I've read all of them. I have all of them. In fact, and my wife also has the same relationship with Pratchett, and our daughter is named Esme after Esme Weatherwax. And I often tell people that if you want to learn about magic and also how to the ethics of magic, I think, read the Witches books by Pratchett. And if you want to learn about social justice, read the Night Watch books. You'll have to do them next.
Okay, my God, more. Nothing will ever get done.
They're absolutely fantastic. And I used to have that thing where, like, every single time I got on a plane, I would buy a Terry Pratchett book in the airport because they always have them. So we have, I think we have all of them somewhere. We lost a few at one point because Esme, the namesake of Granny Weatherwax, when she was about 1.5, she started throwing them out the bedroom window, just for fun. And they were landing in, like, there was a street market going on downstairs, so we never got them back. But hey, hopefully somebody found them.
Oh, there was a question that was earlier back when you were talking about your life in France and what brought you there. Were you a Cathar in a past life?
Interesting. I don't know, but I do find that a fascinating sort of piece of history. And we're not too far. Like, we're kind of on the other side. Those are all over more toward the southeast Pyrenees section. But I've visited some of the castles. I am actually, I'm a total sucker for French sort of occult and esoteric history, and I've actually been working on some projects to do with kind of 19th century diabolical underground sects in Paris and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, my novel, the one that's about to come out soon, is called Unreal City, and it's about 1890s Paris, and about it's kind of influenced by, if you read any of Yeats's short stories. I know most people know the poem Father, but the short stories with Michael Robartes and Owen Ahern, these kind of sort of gentlemen of leisure dabbling in the occult, and it's a bit like that. And the idea is that it's about a young Irish novice priest in Paris at the Irish College who meets these two awful characters who are also Irish, who decide that they want to tempt him from his virtuous path and introduce him to the world of the occult and so on like that. So it was written while I was doing my PhD because I was working on that period, and it was a bit like the letting off steam, like with kind of playful mockery of the stuff that I was studying. And I even in writing it, I even made like an editor's introduction by a kind of a contemporary academic, and he has footnotes going through it, and that kind of tells another story as it goes, and about him and his relationship with his publisher, because he's like writing notes to the publisher in the footnotes. And
what's the title of the book?
It's called Unreal City.
When's it coming out?
I don't have a date yet, but I think probably this autumn.
Okay.
But I will.
Well, let me know when it's out.
Absolutely. And I've got several other projects that are on the go, but it's not easy to find time to sit down and write at the moment. I don't think it's easy for anyone anytime, just the time and also the kind of the right space, the right headspace.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think I should take a lesson from there are some writers, and again I sort of come back to this again, but particularly women writers who aren't precious about their writing time. They're kind of like, oh yeah, well I used to get up at 5 a.m. before my children and write for an hour, that kind of thing. And just when you realize that often men have had that, what Virginia Woolf called the room of one's own. I'm in one now.
Yeah.
But like the idea that it is such a luxury and a privilege to have space to yourself, time to yourself, to be alone with your thoughts. And I think everyone struggles, but I think that you have to teach yourself you can't wait for the perfect moment. You have to just do it. Just stick your nose to the grindstone.
Yes. So when you do, does writing come easily to you?
Yes, I write very quickly and I write very fluently. And so what I've been doing the last few months is mostly writing poetry because I write it because it's quicker. And I write essays as well that I post on a blog. And I think you'll have that in the show notes at some point. The name of the blog is The Hollow Behind the Hearthstone.
So I'm going to put in that link tree that has all of them. Isn't that it? I'll just use that now.
You'll see the whole lot. The whole lot is in there.
What have I done? I've gone into something. Sorry.
Oops.
Get back into my. Are we still here? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
TPP. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really slow at this.
On that, the link tree there, you'll see there's a link to the blog, and I just a couple of months ago started a podcast as well, and I've also got Instagram and even TikTok, which I don't know.
Ooh.
I'm too old for TikTok, but that's all right. I can go on there and shout at young people to get off my lawn.
Okay, brilliant. Yes. Anyway, that's someone says Devourer of Mani says, I think Dave said something about jump starting your muse by writing down everything and anything, even if it's gibberish. Howard, my husband, was a poet, and he would, while he was he never needed a room. He didn't have a space in the house. I do. And not that I use it for writing, mind you, but he would just, while he's down waiting for the bread to rise or the kettle to boil in the morning, he would be writing.
Mm.
Any little, he could do that. So he could take 10 minutes and write in between things, in between kids, because our kids were home educated. He never needed that quiet space to do it.
It's funny, I can do that with poetry because for me, poetry is so woven into everyday life, and it's often like it's about like what's going through. Like sometimes it's not. I don't even have the pen, like or whatever. I'm like I'm walking around and doing it in my head, or you know, but like I think that when you're writing fiction, there's this. You need to be kind of immersed in the world of it. Whereas to write poetry, you need to be immersed in this world, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, so like I and so in the last few months, yeah, I've been trying to, and I try not to be when I'm writing poetry, I try not to be overly critical, and I try not to be overly I try not to overwork it.
Yeah.
I let it be quite spontaneous. But it's funny because this is actually something that I would strongly relate to the beginning of my Druid journey and my journey with Obod, but was the bard work for me involved a huge change in how I wrote because up until then I had been very um, insistent that I was to be a novelist and I was going to write very serious novels and they were going to be very, you know, kind of realist literary fiction, basically. Um, and I had just dabbled with that Unreal City one, which is a bit fantastical, almost as a joke, like almost I was trying to justify it. And then I had kind of dabbled in writing a fantasy novel, and I was like, nah, I don't want to write that. Um, and poetry, I had given up because
Okay.
occasionally I would write poems, but they were not the kind of poems that I thought I was supposed to write. Because I thought that serious poetry was a certain way. And because I was an academic and because I was surrounded by people who studied poetry very seriously and who studied very serious poetry, and poetry had to be, there was a kind of a conventional standard. This is what academic poetry is like, and it's very intellectual and it's very full elusive and it never rhymes. Gosh, that's so gauche, that's so 19th century. Gosh, no. Rhyming is for children. All of that stuff. And whenever I wrote a poem, which I did from time to time, it would be often very sentimental. It would often include kind of mythological or fantastical, magical material, and it would be full of sound effects and rhyme and rhythm and all of that. And so I was like, okay, I'm not a real poet. That's just doggerel. Um, but something happened. See, when I was, and it was literally like, I think I'd started the Obod course beginning of 2019, and I had just turned 40, and my wife had organized um, a 40th birthday present that everyone would chip in for. And it was to go to a writer's retreat for a week. And as you know, and as anyone else who has children knows, when your spouse says, I am sending you away for a week, what they are also saying is, I am going to look after the kids for a week on my own, and you are going to go away on your own. So, I mean, that's already huge. But for me, this was at a time when, I mean, I was very invested in my teaching at the time, and I thought maybe I'm not supposed to be a writer. I've been trying for years to get published. Maybe writing is not what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to teach literature to other people, and I loved doing that, and I still do. And she chose a writing retreat, which was near to Cork for accessibility because that's where my family live, and we were all gonna fly over to Cork, and then I was gonna go to this writers retreat in West Cork, which happened to be called Anam Cara,
Yeah.
which of
So
course is the
yeah,
name of the John O'Donoghue book.
that's
The
right.
word,
Yeah.
if people who don't know it, it's a Irish concept meaning soul friend. Um, and the idea is not just that we can have a soul friend or soul mate, but that we can be one to ourselves,
Yes.
befriending the soul in a sense. And John O'Donoghue and that book they are the ones I had taken that poem from to read at the weddings a few months
Yeah.
before. But my wife didn't know that. She just chose it randomly because it was close to Cork. And so I went there in March 2019, and the woman who runs it is an amazing person called Sue Forbes Booth. And I arrived there, lovely place down on the coast in West Cork. And she welcomed me and was showing me to my room and stuff. And I said, okay, and you know, who else is staying? And she's like, you're the only one, just you. There was no other writers there. It just happened that I was the only person booked in that week, and I thought, oh damn, I was looking forward to hanging out and having dinner with the writers and all this kind of stuff, but no. And also, the night before I left, my daughter, that Esme Weatherwax I was mentioning, she had poured water on my phone, so my phone was kaput. And interestingly, the reason I'm using my phone now is because yesterday she poured water on my computer by accident. But back then she was only 1.5, and she didn't. She just picked up a glass and literally poured water on my phone, and so I had no phone, so I couldn't mess around, like, on the internet or whatever. And I just sat down that day, and I was working. I decided that I would finish that fantasy novel that I was writing because I was going to take it seriously. And for one day I wrote, and it was brilliant, and I did really well. And then the next day I got up, had breakfast, and I went for a walk. And I went down to the beach. I found the beach, which was hard to find. It was quite far. And I was on the beach, and I was full of overflowing emotion and trying to put words on it. And there was a particular sort of painful memory or painful thing in my life that I was coming to terms with. And I was actually, like, opening a circle in the Obod Way on that beach. And then it started pouring rain, and it was like a 20-minute walk back to the village. So I got absolutely soaked.
Blessed. Yeah.
And then I went into the pub to dry off, and I took out my notebook and I started writing poetry, and I did that all the rest of the week. Just wrote poetry, and then ever since.
So you didn't finish the novel at the time?
No. I mean, I want to go back to it, but I felt like something had been unlocked, had been unblocked, and I felt like all my fear of not being the right kind of poet or good enough to be a poet or anything like that was just blown away. And that whole stay, and the Sue who runs the place, in the evenings she would talk to me about poetry. Turns out that her father had been quite an eminent poet. She's American, and she had worked as an editor, including of poetry, and so she would look at my poems with me and tear them apart and put them back together. And
wow, you've frozen there now. I hope you can come back. I don't know if you can hear me, but you have frozen. So let me see. Okay, well, I'm going to read another one of Howard's poets until he comes back. Wait a second. Let's see. I'm just opening this one. It's called Moon. Everyone at peace asleep, I lie awake. Soul waits to break, heaves a cry, deep into pity I sigh. I go out to the shadow casting moon. Ancient tune, what will it show? I seek relief from my woe. Loneliness leaps. I kneel on sheep-shorn grass, greeting moon, casting in deep, drowning abyss, mine to keep. I plead, seeking to escape pain of grief, grown full beneath sorrow's shape. Soul shifts seared by wounds that gape. Cold moon races against clouds, constant light loosening night of soul's shroud, shifting so dawn may rise proud. My loneliness leaps into the dark abyss, searching to miss grief grown spark, pleads for the way to dawn's mark. That book was written, or that poem was written by Howard after his first wife died. On Colonsay, he went out into the full moon and cried and grieved. So anyway, we'll just wait for, hopefully he can come back. And just wonderful comments. Just wait a second. Devourer of Man. I have a theatre friend that is amazing at reading poetry. He can even do it with ingredients on the back of the milk carton, which is hilarious. That is absolutely. No. So we just wait for him. Maybe I'd better read another one, and hopefully he will come back. Wait a second. This is darkness shades so light can be. When fun is done, wisdom knows the mind through darkness must wade, and spring flowers will soon fade. When fun is done, souls will join, making pace as summer's feathers shed, looking for a new way to be fed. When fun is done, wisdom says, strength of breast will hide in autumn sleep, waiting for separated souls to feed. Flesh is formed by joined blood, muscles move on ancestral ground, contracting spirals, new vision found. When fun is done, the everyday succeeds as mothers bring life to being. Winter darkness shades, so light can be. So I don't know if he's going to come back, and maybe we may have to end. So, he's back. He's back. Okay. Welcome back to the fold, Mark.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. It says I have full reception, and yet it seemed
You've frozen again. So, oh dear. So I don't know. Yes, that was a beautiful one. Colonsay, yes, and I've never been. It was a place where Howard went to visit friends. Yes, he did. And he published that book 6 weeks before he passed. So, while he was dying of cancer. Okay, Eimear, a Q&A session. Okay, Pat, ask a question then. until Mark comes back. So if anyone has questions, thank you, Anne. Just saying it's a lovely discussion, and thank you for Howard's lovely poems. So, okay, Pat, you can ask a question, a fair question, and not one that's going to tie me up in knots until he comes back again. So, okay, there's a bit of a delay, so I'll read another poem then, and then. Aside from Howard, who's your favorite poet? Oh, Brendan Kennelly. So I was going to say, I only have two favorite poets, Howard and Brendan Kennelly. And my favorite poem of, what was the book called? It's, this is, you can't, it's probably backwards. It's Darkness Shades, So Light Can Be, by Howard Campbell. And, yeah, that moon poem was particularly moving because it was about grief and out there calling, just on an island with very few trees and the sheep shorn grass, looking at the full moon, crying out. It was so beautiful. So yeah, Brendan Kennelly is my other favorite poem. My favorite poem is actually, I'll read this one. It's written by Howard. I've read this before. He's back. He's back. Let's hope he's coming this time. You're back.
I don't know what's going on. I would tear my hair out if I had any.
Okay.
So it is not my day with technology at all. Anyway,
I was going to read Howard's Aristotle poem, but I won't because this is about you. Now, you know about the other. You said your number of projects on the go. You have a hedge school, and maybe you'd like just to talk a little bit about that and where I know what a hedge school is, but maybe a lot of our viewers don't know what a hedge school is. So, just to share what that is.
yeah. So this is my my recent project for. Of course, I want to be a writer, and of course, I want to publish the books, but I don't think I can make a living from it unless I
Yeah.
get a massive bestseller, because it's just not possible these days to do so. Therefore, I absolutely love teaching. I love teaching literature. And you know, last year we were already living down here, but I was going up to Paris every week for 3 or 4 nights to teach in a university. And I really loved it. I was in a university finally that I really liked, teaching amazing stuff, great students. However, as is the case everywhere, they weren't able to offer me a permanent contract. They could only offer me just like, I guess you'd call it a 0 hours contract, or
Yeah.
an adjunct contract, like where they're just paying me by the hour. They're not
Yeah.
actually paying me a salary, and when you figure in the train tickets and staying away from the family all week during term time, it's just not possible. So I wanted to set up a couple of things. One is to do some online teaching, which I experimented with a couple of years ago, didn't really get very far. And the other one is, so I'm going to try that again. But the other one is that I would like to set up a little school here where I live, because the new place has a couple of kind of outbuildings or annexes that are like half in ruins, and an old barn that we can maybe do up at least enough to have a few chairs and like a little mini classroom. And because we're in France, I can sell this very easily by saying I'm going to do English lessons. However, what they don't realize is that actually I will not be teaching them English, but rather magic. No, what I mean is that instead of doing, you know, sort of grammar and coaching and all this, I'm going to teach them poetry and storytelling, and I'm going to teach them
Beautiful.
acting, and I'm going to teach them debate club, and we're going to do role playing and improv and all this stuff, just so that they get to use their English. Because I know that in class, teachers have a hard time laying down the basics, and the kids don't get much opportunity to actually exercise in the language. So they're going to be doing. I'm planning a little curriculum, and it is going to be very informed by my ideas of bardry and the Shanachie, the storyteller, and all of this stuff. And I'm planning sort of seasonal courses, like each 6 weeks there'll be a different course or whatever. Maybe things at the holidays. Now, why call it a hedge school? Well, I think a lot of people know phrases such as hedge witch and hedge druid, which is by extension from hedge witch or hedge wizard. They're the independent ones, the ones on their own. And I think that the usage hedge witch is either related to or comes from the same as the Irish usage hedge school. And where that comes from is in the 18th and 19th centuries, there were state schools and there were schools run by the Catholic Church. Sometimes they were the same, but there weren't very many in Ireland. And there grew up a kind of a cottage industry, so to speak, in teaching, where you had people who were independent teachers who sometimes would receive students in their own home. They would sometimes travel around and teach kids in other villages, anywhere they could. And it could be in a barn, it could be under a tree, in a ditch, under the hedge. They would literally be teaching them in little tucked away corners, wherever there was a bit of shelter. And these teachers and they would be paid by the parents, who would give them a few pence or whatever, or food, or drink perhaps. And they often would teach very idiosyncratic, unusual curriculum because it was whatever they knew themselves. And there have been stories of English travelers in Ireland at the beginning of the 19th century saying, very interesting to find that the children in this neighborhood seem to have excellent knowledge of geometry and ancient Greek, but very little else, or they would come across these weird combinations. And so the hedge school, I guess it came to represent, and it represents for me, a school that is outside the system and a school that is outside the standard education, and that's maybe a little bit rebellious and a little bit secretive.
Good.
And I like that idea, and I think that if you're teaching children through poetry and storytelling, debating and theater, like for me, by the very nature of those things, those are a bit rebellious and those are a bit special, if you're teaching them right.
Yes. And of course, the hedge schools were really important in Ireland because most children didn't have access to schools because they weren't entitled to an education. And plus, it would have been through English and not through Irish. But I love the idea that finding children who were good in geometry and ancient Greek and little else. It was, that was what that teacher had an interest in, and that's what they would teach. Or teaching Latin or whatever it is. Pat says there were also the rebel schools in certain places during the time of repression. They were to schools what mass rocks were to churches. So because Catholicism was banned in Ireland, and the priests, what they would do would celebrate mass on what were known as mass rocks, but they were probably wedge tombs. They would have been ancient burial sites or sacred sites. And they're now known as mass rocks, but they were way, way, way pre-Celtic, pre-Christian. But interesting.
I had never thought of that. I had never thought that the mass rocks were probably not just erratic, randomly occurring rocks, but actually megalithic structures. Never thought of it. Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So I think the idea of your hedge school sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, I remember learning Irish in primary schools, we all do, but I had a great teacher because in the 5th and 6th class, it was all through conversation. So she had this felt board and little pictures, and then we would create pictures and then we would describe them and talk to them. And that's how I learned my Irish. Plus I went to Connemara for my last term as well. But I got that love for Irish because it wasn't just learning the grammar. It was actually being actively using it. And what brought my Irish back, because I lost it after I learned school, was Druidry. I started using it in ritual. And there was a program called Fuireann G. Fuireann is the Irish word for team. And they had this set up this competition and paired towns to have a competition who could revive Irish. And so Freshford is the local village near me, and they were paired with Cong. So people rang me up and said, Eimear, because it was around the solstice where they'd be filming, would I do a solstice ceremony, Oscailge, which I did. Now, they never showed it on the programme because Cong won. So if they'd put that in, it might have biased people's views of why the Cong. That's my humble opinion. But the point is it got me back and just opened up Irish to me again. And now I use it so I'm doing a wedding on Saturday, and it's Dáithíoncaigh, it's bilingual.
That's wonderful. I wish that I still had it like that, because I love hearing you speak Irish. I love hearing you do Irish in the context of Druidry, because I feel like, honestly, it is finally being given a place in Druidry, which it always had, but was not acknowledged for many, many years. So it my heart sings when I hear you speak Irish in ceremony, in welcome, and so on. I think that's brilliant. And because I've lived in France for 20 years now, I never have a chance to use it.
Right.
But I had exactly what you had, because in secondary school, all the way through, I think I actually had him every year of secondary school. I had the most wonderful teacher. because he was Brian Tyers and he was from the Kirkagreena Gaeltacht.
Okay.
He grew up with it himself. It was a living language to him, and he taught us exactly like what your teacher did. He would come in on a Monday morning, and he'd look around the class, and he'd see somebody who'd got a haircut, and he'd be like, "Oh, well, Baragrugus," and he'd say, "Oh, you got a haircut, did you?" and start making fun of him, and then he'd go on to be like, "Well, what did you all do at the weekend?" You know, in Irish. And we would be like, "This isn't a class, this is a DOS, this is brilliant," you know. And then he'd turn around halfway through and start writing up all the words that we'd learned and all the verbs or whatever. And he taught it like a language that you actually wanted to speak in, and that was alive, and that was fun. He also was on TG Cahir, which is the Irish language television station in Ireland that started around then in the 90s. He did the commentating for Spanish soccer, so he did the Spanish soccer commentary. And but also what he did, and this was amazing, in our senior cycle, you had a choice of options. There was like Irish options for the higher level course, and the one he chose to do with us was Starna Tonga Starna Litríochta, which is the history of Irish and the history of literature. So we learned about not only the history of like the development of the Irish language, learning it in Irish, but we also learned the mythology, and we read Tríocht Diarmid agus Cráine in Irish, the whole thing, like a novel length story about the flight of Diarmid and Gráine. And also, not only that, but like he took great pleasure in pointing out to us the sort of absurd humor or the bawdy jokes and the sort of double entendres and stuff, because he just enjoyed that sort of thing, and we were teenage boys, so did we. And to have read some of our native mythology, and he taught us all about the different mythological cycles and the whole thing in Irish, and to have read that stuff, you know, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and to be speaking that kind of Irish, like, if you and I spoke Irish to each other, we would probably disagree on pronunciation, because you probably still speak Connemara Irish and I speak Munster Irish, and you know, we don't just speak the school Irish.
No. And funny, my Irish was mixed in school. So my primary school, it was mixed, very Munster mixed. And then secondary school was Connemara. So my I'm drawn more to Connemara Irish. However, it's mixed. And my daughter, we have a contract to speak Irish when we're together. So I had lunch with her today, and we just speak Irish. So she went to a Gaelic school at 14. She had never been to school, and she'd had no Irish. Unfortunately, my Irish is good enough now to have had a bilingual home, but not at the time.
Yeah.
So I sent her to school, and not only to a school, she went to a school where she had no Irish, and she speaks Irish now. And she's interested now. And the fact that she's 21, so at night, you know, it's 18. I was like, that's all about you and your dead language. Who cares? It's all about you, Eimear. And now it's like, yeah, I really enjoy it. So we speak Irish together. And
there's some of my friends.
Go on.
Sorry, some of my friends who are back in Ireland, particularly in Cork, a lot of them who didn't come from Irish-speaking families have, as young adults and now older adults, like middle-aged adults, made a huge effort to acquire it, and not just to acquire it, but to speak it to their children. And to one of my friends, actually, I don't know if you've ever come across the media empire of the People's Republic of Cork. It's like he actually has there's a newspaper column, but there's
it doesn't surprise me, because we know how Cork feel about themselves.
You'll see people, you'll run into people all over the world wearing a red T-shirt with a white People's Republic of Cork and a white star, you know, that kind of design, right? But also they make a big deal of also it being Dain Phoblacht Corchaí, like in Irish, and through that, they have also done. They would run stand-up comedy nights in Irish, and they would run sort of live music sessions in Irish, and just conversation things where they were encouraging people to go out to a pub and speak Irish to each other, and especially people who weren't fluent, just with whatever Irish they had. There, it's not. I don't think it's on. It'll take a long way before we're on the level of Wales in terms of bilingualism. But I think that there's a lot of people realizing now that you don't have to be bilingual to use what you have.
That's right.
That it doesn't have to be perfect. That the phrase that we use in Ireland is the cúpla focal, the few
That's right.
words.
Yeah.
It just I find myself really drawn to it now too, especially because of that connection with the Druidry and with the mythology and the place name lore, things like that.
I'm nerdy driving around looking at Irish road signs because, unfortunately, the English changed the place names, anglicised them or phoneticized them, and by doing so, removing the meaning and the understanding from the place name. And so I read road signs, and anyone was like, "Oh, that's what that means." Do you know what that means? Like a place in Cork, or it's Kerry, Kishkeam or Kishkeam. And in Irish, it's Cushcame na Cali, the footsteps of the hag. Now, if you didn't know that, it's like, that's magic.
Wonderful.
So lots of places. So
speaking of which, actually, just it links back to my story about the writer's retreat, because funnily enough, that writer's retreat, that place, Anamcara, that magical place, is in a little village which is called Eiries, which is written like an eagle's eyrie. Plural, right? E-Y, what is it? E-Y-E-R-I-E-S, something like that. So you think, right, that's the English name, Eiries, you think it must be something to do with eagles, there's mountains, blah, blah, blah. But no, as I found out when I was there, it's in Irish, it's Nahairi, which is from Ira, which means adoration. So it means the adorations. And one of the theories is because this was one of the high places of the cult of the Culach.
Of the Culach, brilliant. Yeah.
And she has up on one of the headlands, there is the hagstone, the Culach, on Culach Vera. It's on the Vera Peninsula. So it's the Culach Vera, And so one of the things that I did while I was there was went on pilgrimage to meet the Culach and present to her my adorations.
Brilliant. And there are a number of place names around the country. Nahairaka.
Is that right? Yeah. And do you think would you believe that it's because of that it means worship, or could you see it as meaning something else?
Well, Eir itself, Oighir, means ice. Lac Eir.
Yeah, but I'm talking about it's it's ADH.
Oh, okay.
It does mean adoration, like that's the dictionary definition.
Okay.
But there's another on Beara, the Beara Peninsula. The next place further out is Allihies.
Yes, I've been there. Yeah.
What did you think of it?
Beautiful, absolutely. Yeah.
When I went there, I found it absolutely strange, disturbing, unnerving, and I don't know why. It was to do with the day, to do with the circumstances, the weather. We walked into the pub and everybody, there was like 3 people, and they just turned around and looked at us like kind of, who the hell are you? Really weird, really. So anyway, they told me that the name Allihies comes from Nahalachi, which means the echoes.
Okay.
And they say it is the echoes of the souls of the unborn children who were not baptized and who died. It's lost souls of little children. Echoes. And that I was taken aback by that idea. And then, it got us onto the conversation of the Killeen, which means little church, but actually the little cairns of stones where they buried unbaptized children who were stillborn or died near birth, and they were not holy places. They were sacred, but they were taboo.
Yeah.
And some people associate them with the fairies. Therefore, some people say even that the unbaptized children, rather than going to limbo, which is a piece of Catholic dogma that has been written off the books now, but they said that, babies who weren't baptized could not go to heaven or hell. They would be sent to limbo forever. So yeah, they've revised that doctrine. But that idea, somehow they could be buried in what was fundamentally like a fairy mound, or would become a fairy mound, and that the fairies, who were also in between heaven and hell, might take care of them. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So it's a weird place, that part of West Cork. If you go even further out, it's Dursey Island, and the only way to get to it is a cable car.
I've never gone there.
Me neither. And I think they're shutting down the cable car soon, because I don't think anyone lives there anymore. But Dursey, they say, not they say, in reality, this is a story I picked up when I was there too. In the 1600s, the early 1600s, English soldiers cliffed the entire population, which is to say they drove them off a cliff into the sea, as a way of killing them.
Wow.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the word Dursey comes from Durrus, meaning door, and they say that the island is a door to the other world as well.
Wow, fascinating. What's the Irish word for Alahis again?
Nahalachi.
Okay. Alia is a cliff.
Yeah.
You were talking about echoes. Mach Allah means the son of the cliff. So if you're in the sea, which is when you speak, you get it back. The cliff comes back to you. That's the origin. Yeah.
I was trying to think of that Irish word, son of the wall, son of the cliff.
Yeah.
It's like, the thing is, I think that we could probably sit here and start exchanging Irish place names with each other and the stories behind them, but it is such a rich thing that we have become so disconnected from, or that we have lost or had taken from us. But people are reconnecting to that, and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's about no point whinging about the past. It's what you do in the present now, and do it and pick it up again, which people are. I was at a camp last year, and there were a lot of young people, and they set up. They had a pop-up Gaeltacht. So all these young people, and myself and another Alwyn, two old crones, we were the only older people there. And so I was saying, well, why did you set up this? Why did you want this? So they just had a sharing, and all of them said, I learned Irish in school, I liked it, and I'm afraid I will lose it. So I want to, at every chance I can, to speak it. Because languages are dying out around the world.
I think you can absolutely draw the parallel. The other Celtic languages, those of Britain, but also then, of course, Breton, and then down where I am now, about 100 kilometers away is the Basque country, where they speak Basque. But then here, where I am now, all of the sign of my village is written in French and in Occitan. Because Occitan is a dead language, but there is a revival movement. Brilliant. Same as with Cornish, right? The last native speakers died out over 100 years ago, or about 100 years ago. But Occitan, there's a big push for Occitan culture to return. And you mentioned Cathars earlier, someone in the chat. Occitan and Cathars go together a lot, because the Albigensian Crusade was, in some ways, a crusade by the north of France, by the French around Paris, that area. They're the ones who spoke French, and against the Occitan, the Duke Raymond of Toulouse and so on, who got involved in the Cathars. But it was kind of a war of colonial invasion. They were colonial and cultural invasion. Yes, all of that was, in theory, France, but not really. the street I live on is La Rue Henri de Navarre, and
Oh, Henry of Navarre. Okay.
yeah. And what a lot of people don't know is like Navarre was a separate kingdom, right? And he was king of Navarre, and he became Henry IV of France for various reasons. But like around where I am now, there's a lot of those traces of the older place names, the older languages, a lot of traces of the wars of religion. You know, it is, and all of these things, I think, when people pay that kind of attention to the deep history, to the past, because it's everywhere, to the landscape and to the human impact on it, which is
Mhm.
what history is, in a sense. Um, you know, all of those things, again, I think, are part of our calling. I think that when I think of Druidry, one of the things that I love the most about it is that I feel that it is a good and benevolent and honorable calling and path, because others might have other features, things that tempt you, things that interest you, but there is an aspiration to Druidry, which is that to be a Druid, I think, is to care for your world and to care for other people, to care for your landscape and to care for its history, to care for its growing things, to care for your environment, and it's to try to make things better.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't know that other other neo-pagan paths or other kind of magical paths or anything like that. I don't know very many of them that are so explicitly about community and leadership in it, and about nurturing and mentoring, and about
Service.
aiding. Like all of those
Service.
things that to me are such great values, you know. That's what I think makes me most proud of being a part of that, to be honest. And,
It's
and I mean,
wonderful.
and also, I mean, sure, the emphasis on art and music and craft and poetry and um, all of these things. It's it's interesting because sometimes I think that that maybe it's utopian too, which isn't a
Yeah.
bad thing. But I think sometimes that it that you also need the other side of things, which is the more which is witchcraft. Because
Say
I
that
think
again.
witchcraft, because I think that sometimes I think that Druidry represents what we would like to be, and sometimes witchcraft represents what we need in order to resist. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, explain that
No?
again now. So
So,
Druidry is okay. Could you start again?
okay, I think that um, I want to live in a society that is run by Druids, but that is
Okay.
not what we have, or that
Okay.
is run. Let us say that is run by on Druidic principles,
Principles. Okay, and
right?
values. Yeah.
Not literally by the actual, you know what I mean.
Okay.
Um, but I think that sometimes, in order to respond to the society that we actually live in, one needs to resort to um, sort of darker methods that we can get from witchcraft.
Which is what isn't that what politics do anyway? Well, it's
I
not that
guess,
they're
I guess no, I mean for sure. I think that I don't know. I suppose that my what I'm trying to say in a way is that I think that um, to me, Druidic philosophy is um, a a bringing together of community, and that witchcraft methods are the methods of those who are marginal, those who are eccentric, those who are outside the mainstream. Do you see? Anyway, it's something that it's something that that I think upon.
Somebody here has written survival magic versus poetic magic.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's a bit of it. Definitely. I mean,
And
obviously,
Sandy says, "Do I mean this comes from, we'll say, Aleister Crowley, but do as you will, but harm none, and at harm none." So yeah, I suppose, does it have to be dark arts to get goodness? Because then it's like, let's have a war for peace. Is it not?
no. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's about having a war for peace. I think it's about you know, rebelling against the societal conventions that are imposed upon us today.
Oh, druids can do that.
I know. Of course, it's you can. I think that you can use your whatever path that you're on to respond to your circumstances. You know, that's otherwise it would be lacking. But yeah,
Harriet says, sounds like Harriet Sams is here. Sounds like there's a need. It needs a philosophy as well as a practice. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I suppose I don't want to get us completely sidetracked on this, but kind of, yeah. I think that to me, Druidry does imply a philosophy, but interestingly, it's because Harriet's there, because I was talking to her the other day, and one of the things that we were talking about was that, and one of the things that I kind of came up with was that I guess it doesn't necessarily, like Druidry is not so much a philosophical position as a kind of a philosophical disposition. It doesn't dictate what we should think. It doesn't dictate one particular. It's not a dogma. It's not a. There's no holy book. There's no holy writ. There's no real agreement even about what exactly it is.
Right.
But I do think it is a disposition, in the sense that it is a kind of an orientation towards the world.
That's right. Yeah. I just want to clarify this. Seaweed and Eat It says, I don't understand. So is Druidry witchcraft? I didn't think it was. No, Druidry isn't witchcraft. No.
I was contrasting them, in fact, but yeah, sorry for.
But Julia is coming up. I think I get what you're saying. A Druidic philosophy with magical practice to manifest it into light.
Yeah. I think perhaps it's that. Like, I think that I know that a lot of Druids do practice magic, but it's not necessarily something we talk about that much. At least among the conversations that I have been a party to. But I suppose it's yeah, long story short, I think that it is an approach. Druidry is an approach. It is a disposition, an orientation towards the world that I think can really teach a lot of lessons to our society now, and to where we want to go with it, you know?
Yeah.
And I know it's not it doesn't proselytize, of course. But it's funny because I think that whenever people come into contact with it, people who aren't familiar necessarily, whenever people come into contact with it, they're quite impressed. I think people kind of go, oh well, yeah, I mean, I like all those things, you know?
That's so true. So true. Listen, we have come much longer than I'd intended. So it's been and we haven't completed in any way, hardly dipped into a conversation. It's been so interesting. So we're almost at 10 o'clock. We're close to the 2-hour mark. And I tried to stay this side of it. But anyway, we're going to go over it. So it's been just such a joy talking to you, Mark. So I'm going to end with my 2 final questions. What is your favorite season of the year? And what is your favorite festival, that to mark the wheel of the year?
Autumn and Samhain, definitely.
Okay.
No hesitation. But I mean, I love all the seasons, but autumn is the one that captures my imagination.
Yeah. What is it about? Because I mean, an autumn in France, I don't know if it's like autumn here.
Oh, well, where I am, the seasons are much more distinct than they are in Ireland.
Okay.
In Ireland, it's like, there's the rainy season and the slightly less rainy season.
Sometimes you
But
can get all four in one day. That's true.
yeah, absolutely. But here there's like, it doesn't get very cold in winter, but it gets pretty cold. But spring and autumn are just amazing. And I think that I love the beauty of it, but also the melancholy. I love the sense of things kind of dying down and going out with a beautiful bonfire of colors. And
Yeah.
I love the smell of wood smoke, and I love the slight chill in the air. And also, I think being an academic, there's something about the autumn, like, the classes start again, and I love to sweep around the place in a tweed coat and a scarf, and autumn is just my natural state of being, I think.
Brilliant. Listen, Mark, it's been such a joy talking to you. Really, really enjoyed it. Very, very interesting. And we could have gone on for hours and hours and hours. Carol says, I always learn with these chats. So thank you both. Very interesting. So thank you both for today. Blessings and aloha. So somebody's from Hawaii, and it amazes me that people so far away are listening to us. I really enjoyed this. Hasn't felt anything near 2 hours. Thank you both so much. No, it didn't feel like 2 hours. It's just, it's gone so.
Eimear, it has been absolutely brilliant. What a pleasure to kind of like meet you, really, because we've never had a proper chat. So it's been wonderful. And thank you everyone who chipped in and who was listening and watching. This has been a wonderful moment to speak to all of you. Not something I ever would have imagined, and yet here we are.
Yes. So someone says, what's your favorite ceremony? But you said Samhain was your favorite ceremony, didn't you? Yeah. Anyway, you're frozen again, so I'm going to send you back. So don't go. Oh, you're back. I'm going to send you back into the green room. I'll say goodbye, and then we can look over the comments. So
okay, yeah.
You can say good night to everybody, or whatever time of day it is. Good morning, good afternoon. Okay. So thank you so much for your lovely comments. Somebody's in chilly, dreary Alaska. Okay. So it's been lovely. I forgive my voice. So listen, thank you so much. I wish you good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and hope you have a very good week. I won't be here for the next 2 weeks because I'm heading off early next week to Glastonbury. We will have our summer gathering in Glastonbury the weekend after this, and I'm having a few days afterwards. I'm hoping to go to Cornwall. So I will be back in 3 weeks' time. Just let me check my date, just to make sure that, I'll be back on the 15th of June and look forward to seeing you all then. In the meantime, be well. Slán go fóill.